in the right place. He's presenting on a new language for engaging volunteers in major gifts. So Dan is a certified fundraising executive and consultant for Richner & Richner. I'm pleased to say he's my fellow board member at Association of Fundraising Professionals, the Greater Detroit chapter, and also serves on the membership committee. And Dan has a distinguished resume that you can read in the bio, so I'm not going to read all that to you. But I think you might like to learn something maybe a little more interesting about Dan. So I'm going to share a couple of things with you, and we will seek audience input on which two are the truths and which one is the lie. Okay, so listen carefully. Dan is the first in his family to earn a bachelor's degree. Is that the truth or lie? Dan solicited a six-figure gift in Russian. Dan performed on live radio for the WDET Music Festival. So, anybody have any idea which one does not fit Dan?
The first, there's just one that doesn't fit.
The third.
So you think that Dan was not the first one in his family to earn a bachelor's degree?
Sure.
Okay. What do we have on this side of the room? Gary Jargon?
First one also.
Really?
Second one.
Second one is why? You didn't solicit a six-figure gift in Russian?
Should I wait till the end to reveal the truth so you have to stay?
That's a good angle.
The first one is true. I'm the first in my family. Wayne State University, go Tartars.
Warrior now.
Tartars.
Tartars.
Once a Tartar, always a Tartar. The third one is also true.
What did you perform?
I performed in a saxophone quartet called Winds Ex Odeon, and we were on live radio performing a selection of numbers for that. The second one, it was actually solicited in German. The one and only time I actually had to use my college major in my profession. So thank you for joining me today. Thank you for letting me share you a little bit of unusual information about me. I'd like to share with you this presentation about a new language for engaging volunteers. And let me tell you about the origin of this idea. It starts in a used bookstore in Sarasota, Florida, where my daughter, the inveterate bookworm, randomly pulled a book off the shelf called Metaphors We Live By. And she was really fascinated by this book, which explained how we have unconsciously used metaphors in our everyday language and the way that it affects our thinking about things. This is one example from that book. Everything that we talk about in discourse is set up as a battle. We talk about winning an argument. Just by the very fact that we're using a metaphor about fighting when we're talking about a conversation leads to certain consequences for our experience of discourse with other people. So that really kind of put a light bulb over my head, and I started thinking about the language that we use as fundraisers. So my objective with you today is to accomplish these four things. One is to confess our fears about fundraising, because this is where it starts. You're here because you have a situation where it's difficult to engage your volunteers around questions of fundraising, getting them involved, and that speaks to what's holding them back. The second is we're going to kill the language that's holding them back. We're going to introduce a new metaphor for what we do as fundraisers, and then you're going to go out and you're going to raise tons of money. Very simple. So let me start, though, with a little bit of the philosophy, my personal philosophy and the philosophy of Richner & Richner when it comes to fundraising. Fundraising is about relationships with people. I'm sure we're all familiar with that, but that's really at the core of it. It's a connection of individuals, credible leadership, whether that's executive leadership or volunteer leadership, and individuals who want to see something accomplished in the world. There's a lot that we do as professionals that is transactional by design, but really the core of successful fundraising we look to is these relationships. So let's talk about fundraising fears. why would a volunteer who is passionate about your organization be afraid to be involved in fundraising? Just raise your hand or just shout it out. What do you think you're afraid of? Trish?
Fear of the no.
Fear of being told no, fear of rejection. Others?
Questions that we ask.
They're afraid of questions that they're going to be asked. Why is that something that they're afraid of? They won't know the right answer. Others?
Fear of asking people for money in return at being asked for money by that same person for another charity.
Being asked in return. Others? Other reasons why your volunteers might be afraid? Well, here's my top three. They're afraid because there are real risks to the volunteer. This isn't, I mean, let's be honest about this. You're asking them to do something risky for them personally. The risks are reciprocity, reputation, and relationships. Those are my top three. And what does that actually mean? So, reciprocity. We had that mentioned here. It's the quid pro quo, right? I'm going to do my chit, and then I'm going to be asked in return. And the worst part about it is that if I'm the first one asking, I've empowered that person to say yes or no. But when the request comes back, the social obligation is on me to say yes. So there's a real risk that that they're going to be asked and obligated to give in return, and that return might be something that is not simply they're indifferent to the cause, they might actively hate the cause. Reputation. Our input there about, I'm going to be asked a question and I'm not going to be prepared. One of the number one fears that we each have as adults is the fear of embarrassment. The fear of being in front of a group of other adults and being shown to be incompetent or unprepared or not able to fulfill a responsibility. This is a real fear that they will appear foolish because they're being put into a role that they're not prepared for, they're not familiar with it, they don't know what to say, they're going to be asked a question that they won't know the answer to, or they'll give a wrong answer. And so this is a real fear that they'll be in front of people who are matter to them, more important to them, and they'll come off looking like a fool. And then the last thing is relationships. So when we think about what's the common images of fundraising, there's two really common ones, and I've tipped my hand there. Let me go back. Okay. So what are the two common images of fundraising? You already saw one of them.
Pickpocket.
The pickpocket, the beggar. So they think that you're casting them in the role of a supplicant, somebody who is beneath the person being asked. So that's the first one. And that changes the relationship. It changes the dynamic between people who are familiar with one another. And the other one is the mighty hunter. We're going to go out and we're going to bag that elephant. Or the other, here's another metaphor. It's like, just give me 10 people from your Rolodex and we'll just do scattershot. It's like duck hunting, right? Throw those cards in the air, we'll take out our shotgun, bang. And then some of them will be hit and they'll fall to the ground and we'll collect them. Either way, these are uncomfortable roles for a volunteer to be put into. It changes the dynamic of their relationships. It's like we do a lot of work in our firm with retirement communities, and there's this fear that if a resident is going to be a volunteer in the fundraising program, when they go walking down the hallway and they see their neighbor and they all live together, that someone's going to turn around and walk the other way. It's like, oh, here comes Mildred. She's going to come and ask me for money. That changes the relationship. It changes the social relationships when people are cast in volunteer. That's what they fear. And it's a real fear we have to be concerned about. So what do we do about all this? Well, before we get to that, let me talk about some of the things that we are saying as fundraising professionals that get in the way of our volunteers being successful. Why do we use jargon? It's easy. Other reasons why we might use jargon. Every profession has its little words and phrases that they use. It's easy because it's a shortcut. Secret society, exactly. It's the way that we as fundraising professionals prove to our peers that we know what the hell we're talking about. right? And it has no place when we're talking to non-professionals, because here's the consequences of, these are some of my least favorite bits of jargon. Leverage, cultivation, and moves management. How many of you have ever talked to your board or to a volunteer group, your fund development committee, and used these terms to describe what you're doing as a fundraiser? I see some hands going up. So these are loaded with meaning, but it's not your meaning because you're not talking to fundraising professionals. So first of all, let's talk about leverage. When we say leverage, what do we mean? Getting more to give, getting more because you're because of their giving. So you know when you're talking about physics, leverage means that you make a very small effort and get a very large result. You know, it's the famous saying, give me some place to stand and I can move the world. That's not what people think of. Leverage means force. For your volunteer, when you say, I want to leverage your relationship, it goes back to the pickpocket idea. Telling a volunteer that you want to leverage your relationship. A lever, think about the financial crisis, right? What was one of the things that the press always said was the cause of the financial meltdown? People were over-leveraged. Leverage is a bad word. It has the connotation of force. It has the connotation of something negative now. So let's agree that leverage should be out of the vocabulary when we're talking to volunteers. So the other one, cultivation. I sometimes wonder how this word got into our lexicon. So what does cultivation mean? Plant a seed, water, liberally apply some BS, and then you have a happy bunny. Right? So that's what we think of when we use the term cultivation is we have a process. I mean, it's something positive for us. It's a process that we follow carefully and apply systematically, and we get a consistent result. That's not what a volunteer thinks of when the cultivation. I mean, if they know the term cultivation at all, it's an agricultural metaphor. It's this sense of, yeah, Lori?
Well, I'm just gonna say, my daughters who happen to be in their late 20s, early 30s, when they hear that I'm doing a cultivation event, they come right out. That is the worst thing to call that. What does it mean to be, well, what's another word to use when you're having an event, like a chamber meeting or whatever else we've used in someone's home? Anyone have any other good words?
Well, we're going to get to that.
Oh.
But is anyone using a different terminology besides cultivation? Time? Tea with time. Perfect. I love that. That's going to fit into the new metaphor I want to share with you. So this last one, moves management. So what do we mean when we're talking about moves management? What's the positive thing that we think we're saying when we say moves management? Strategic. Thank you. So this is what we're thinking of with moves management, right? Your volunteer probably hears moves management and they think manipulation. They think we're going to maneuver a person into a position where we win. Yay, we've managed them into a gift. This is also a negative from the perspective of your volunteer. So you could probably think of other jargon that you're using unconsciously because it's part of our lexicon as fundraising professionals, and it's very likely that your volunteers are either just kind of glazing over, or they're thinking of, oh my God, leverage, moves management, why would I do that to a friend of mine? Why would I manage a move with my business partner or a person who I'm socially close with? So those are, for me, the top three perpetrators when it comes to the language that we use, the metaphors that we use to describe what we're doing as fundraisers. So let me move on to what I think is a better metaphor. And the reason why I like this is because, well, there's many reasons why I like it. Partly because I came up with it, or reinvented it. I think I've seen some others do something similar to this. It's familiar language. It's something that is in the common experience of most of the people that you're going to be working with as volunteers. And it's something almost unequivocally positive. And the language I would like to suggest that we use when we're talking to our volunteers about their role in major gifts is the language of courtship. So their role as volunteers, as board members, as other recruits to your cause is to help you court your donors. And there are some really important characteristics when you start talking about the language of courtship. You cast them, instead of casting them in the role of the hunter or the beggar, you're casting them in the role of a trusted matchmaker. You want them to be your yenta. Courtship applies mutual interest. It's not one directional. It's not something that is done to a person. It's in both ways. Good courtship, patient and respectful, and it's ongoing. So let's dive into that a little bit more deeply and throw out your challenges, your questions, your own. If you've done this, if you've used this metaphor in the past, if you've used this language in the past, let's hear what your kind of success has been in it. Let me pause for a moment. Did anybody participate in the AFP's May session where Tom Ahern came together with Simone Jaillot? So we have a few people. So there's been some really interesting research done in England, and the outcome of that is this notion of loverizing your language, your communications when it comes to fundraising. They're particularly talking about fundraising appeals, but I would encourage you to, if you Google the word loverize, make sure you have your filters on, I suppose. Google that term, maybe fundraising and plus loverize, and you'll get some really good background, some really deep research about how this language of family and of love really makes a difference in the way that people respond to requests. So you're going to cast your board chair, the chair of the Fund Development Committee, the capital campaign chair as your matchmaker when it comes to, and so instead of saying, we want you to open the door, we want you to leverage your relationships, we want you to be a good matchmaker. So what are the characteristics of a good matchmaker? They know both parties well. They know your organization and they know the interests of the donor. So it's not like you're not setting up somebody on a blind date. It's like, I think that I know something about you as an individual, and I think that this is an organization that will match with what you are most passionate about. Which cuts to the second point here. A good matchmaker truly believes that the match benefits both parties, right? And they know how to bring people together in the right way. So, and I like this, no shotgun weddings. The other thing this implies is that no stalking. So how many times have you been in a board meeting or a fund development committee meeting and somebody says, well, why don't we have Dan Gilbert on the list? Yeah. It's like, that is not a good match. Unless you know something about Dan Gilbert that suggests to you that he would be really passionate about what you're trying to accomplish. Right? So the first step here is we're going to cast our volunteers in the role of the matchmaker. We're going to use that language with them to describe what it is that you want them to do. It's like, we want you to really be, and what this might do is that instead of a potential list of dozens of people that they know casually, it narrows the list down to a half dozen who are really good matches. And that has an added benefit for you as a fundraiser, is that it clears the deck of all the draws. It narrows it down to the people who reasonably have an expectation for connecting in a human level with what it is that you're trying to accomplish in the world. So let's get to mutual interest here. So again, a good match, common interests, common values. So what's the difference between your interest and your values? So I'm personally interested in education. That's my cause. It's my number one cause. I think that education has the power to transform individual lives, and through that, our entire society. But there's a broad range of ideas about how education should actually be realized in the world. So it's important to know that your business partner, for example, is not only interested and passionate about the cause of education, but that the way that your organization does education fits in with that person's values. So some people, they think that the way to have effective education is through public school academies, through charter schools. Some people think it's through parochial education, through Catholic and other religious schools. Some think it's through the tax support of our public education system. That speaks to a person's values. So it has to go beyond the interest to really understand, what do I know about this person in a fundamental level that would make me think that not only do they care about our cause, but they would care about the way that we address our cause. And ideally, light a spark. Something that's going to really be, that person is going to come back to your volunteer, if you're a matchmaker, and say, thank you for that introduction. That was really important. And there's my no stalking comment joke. Any questions on any of this so far? David?
I think that this is great, particularly for people that can psych out in advance and know what turns them on. But I found that most people don't necessarily know what they value, or they haven't really articulated it. So how do you deal with that? Do you so-called waste time on people like that? And you focus on the people that you're familiar with and know that they share your values and your interests? Or do you invest time in people and maybe even light a fire under them for your particular cause?
Did everyone hear David's question? So what do you do when you don't know what's going to ignite the spark? What do you do if you have a willing volunteer who will make the introductions, will open the door, but doesn't know that this criteria is in place? Mary?
Might be a great experience for two friends. And last year,
Yeah, so Mary suggests that if you start with a prerequisite of a willing volunteer, says, I don't know this about my friend, but I'm still willing to talk to them about it. Maybe what you do in a case like that. Are there other ideas about how you would address a situation like that? I mean, that's not an uncommon situation. So what I'd suggest that in a case like that, where you have a volunteer who is willing, but doesn't have this kind of deep relationship with a potential donor, doesn't know what they're really passionate about, doesn't know their values, is that you equip that volunteer for a conversation that is on a different level, that doesn't talk specifically about your organization to start, but draws that person out in the conversation about what they truly value. So if you have a situation where the volunteer has a close enough relationship with the person who may become a prospective donor that you think, it's worth opening the door. So you prepare your volunteer with a handful of leading questions that are entirely focused on the donor. Like Ray Odom was talking this morning. I love his presentation about really getting at the heart of what makes a person tick. And say, take them out for a beer, take them out for a meal, and get them talking. Let us kind of test the waters here. It will probably be a more satisfying relationship. We'll take that relationship to a deeper place, first of all. It could be more gratifying for your volunteer to have that interaction. And going back to the beginning where we noted that one of the fears that our volunteers have is to appear foolish, is to harm their reputation by being foolish in this situation, is that to draw them, to cast them in a role, but prepare them for the role. Here's something I've noticed in my work with a lot of nonprofit organizations, where the chief development officer has some time on the board meeting agenda, and they get up and they make a really impassioned plea for, we need the board to be behind our fundraising effort. We need you to introduce us to the people. We have this plan in place. We take a really careful approach. It's all very personal. It's all relationship based. You know, it's all one-on-one kind of, nothing is off the shelf. We're really, really careful with our relationships. And boy, we can't do it without you. And by the way, there's an envelope at your table for you to make your annual gift. What's wrong with that? Renee, yeah.
You just told them you want to do this in a one-on-one scenario, but you've done it in a group format by asking them for their gift. You haven't sat down with them one-on-one and discussed what their legacy is, what they want to do for the organization. So you've treated them differently. So what they're hearing is, we want to treat their friends differently, but in reality, we probably won't, because we've just asked you in front of everyone else to make a gift.
Yeah.
You're totally misleading your board.
Right. I mean, the natural conclusion is one of two things. For a board member in that situation, where a fundraiser gets in front of the board and says, we need your help, we do this really carefully, we're great at relationships and major gift fundraising, and by the way, there's an envelope at your seat there, make your annual gift. The only thing they conclude, there are only two things that they can conclude from that. One is, you, as a board member, don't matter to me. You're not important. What's important is the person who can make the largest gift. And if you can't make a large gift, then, I'm not going to waste my time. That's one conclusion that they can make. Another conclusion that you make is, you're lying. You're not careful. You're not going to take the time. It's all going to be rote. It's all going to be just, here's our annual appeal, please give. Those are not good things for your board members to think about fundraising. So to go back to this notion here, what do you do for that volunteer? I suggest is model the behavior for the volunteer. You be the matchmaker for your board, for your volunteer, so that they can see you doing it. Take them out for a beer, take them out for coffee or tea, and draw them out. Ask them the questions that you want that person as your matchmaker to ask the prospective donor. That way, it builds up their confidence in you as a fundraiser, that you really can do it. And it shows them, by example, the language, the manner, how you ease into different parts of the conversation. That really builds up the confidence, and it makes them feel like, you know what, if I go out on a call, again, that's a little jargon, if I go out on a call with David, I'm absolutely certain that this is going to be a great experience for me and for the guy I'm introducing David to, because he's done it for me and I know he does it really well. He asked those questions so easily. It was like, before I knew it, I was telling him my entire life story and why I'm engaged in this organization, why I really care about this cause. I know he can do it well, and I'm confident that he's going to be a great person to bring along. You can model that to your board, to your volunteers, and then you address that one of those key fears. Lori?
I'm assuming that the volunteers that you're asking to participate in this are donors themselves. Do you find that there's any level of donor that they need to be? Can they be a small donor, but they're volunteering their time hands-on? Or do they have to be giving you a significant amount of money to ask someone else?
What's the experience of the group? Is there a minimum gift before a person is an effective fundraising volunteer?
As long as it is a gift that personally matters to them.
As long as it's a gift that personally matters to them. Other? Renee?
Some people are really well connected, but not affluent themselves. So just as you said, they may support your organization, but they're very passionate about it and have friends who can significantly impact the value of your organization. And they'd be willing to do that if they're armed with enough information.
Did everyone hear Renee's response? David?
I've had the experience where people that sit on the fund development committee when we had that weren't making any zero contributions themselves, yet were kind of thinking that they were expecting others to make contributions, so they weren't modeling behavior themselves.
Well, there's a disconnect there when you have fundraising volunteers who aren't donors themselves. Well, let me elaborate a little bit on this answer over here. That's the answer that I feel is appropriate, is this personally meaningful gift. What does that mean? What can you suggest to a volunteer, a board member, of how do I know when it's personally meaningful? So here is a couple of ideas for that. You can tell your board members in particular that when you agree to serve on our board, we would like our organization to be in your top 3 organizations to receive your charitable giving. It doesn't set a minimum amount. It doesn't set a maximum amount. So if you know a certain area philanthropist who serves on the board of an important arts organization and is giving $250,000 a year, when you say our expectation for every board member is that our organization becomes a top 3 organization for your giving while you're serving on the board. You know, there's that apocryphal story about one of Bill Gates' classmates from his private high school going to solicit him, and he asked, well, what are other people giving? And the guy says, well, the average gift is $75. So, you know, Bill gets out his checkbook and writes a $75 check, right? So that kind of social norm is really important. So you can communicate to your board member, what do you mean when you say personally meaningful? For us, we know that each of our board members has different needs, but we'd like to suggest that personally meaningful means we're in your top 3.
Does that include faith-based?
Yeah, I would say so. I think that, I mean, if you know that about your board member, I think a lot of people, their church is their number one cause. So I'd rather have them comparing themselves to what they're giving to the church annually than to what they're giving in the 3 next down the list. Renee?
Would you go as far as to stipulate your personal gift? Because many board members represent a company who supports your organization. And many board members are conflicted with or I think gift officers are conflicted with how you approach them. If it's someone, you come into an organization, they're an existing board member, how do you approach them to say your personal gift in addition to your corporate? How would you phrase that? And are you thinking that that should be the case?
I'm going to put it to the group. That's my methodology here. It's not really fun. I'm just really interested in learning from everyone too, what the range of answers might be. Mary?
I've understood all this as personal, and particularly because the other board members in the room that don't have businesses, those are 2 separate tax entities. If they want to give a corporation or whatever, that's fine, it has to be personal. At least one of them has to be personal, because that's different than business. Because I personally care, not if my business gets marketing.
Bob?
I agree generally with what you're saying, because personal represents skin in the game. And I feel like that's the statement that someone is making, right? It's that I have skin in the game. I really do believe in this organization. And it's a representational, but it's a good way to sort of show it. And if it's cheap money or easy money, it's nice money, it's great to have. But the advocacy that goes to that personal level, that becomes the narrative to the friend, is kind of foreshortened by that.
Isn't that an awkward conversation though? Because what if you're getting thousands of dollars in business? How do you have that conversation because it says, we really want your skin? You know, in other words, they might feel they are putting their skin, it is their business.
Let's have this Renee respond to that. You look like you had your hand up.
And I think it all should fall under the line of the relationship building